Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And before we get into today's episode, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the algorithm, but also we love hearing from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, having said all of that, let's get into it. Prologue to today's game session begins in the dimension known as Earth K, where it is now Friday, the 13th of September, 1991, where Ryan Miller, better known as Torch, walks into the library at the local high school. Already in here are Chris Briggs, who has now settled on the superhero name of Powerhouse, as well as Jay Mora, who will eventually land on the name of Shadowstorm, but he hasn't quite come up with it yet. So when Ryan walks in, Chris is quietly helping Jay workshop names like Night Strike or Black Bolt. Jay mentions that Black Bolt is already taken, and Chris is a little surprised by this because he hasn't ever heard of the Inhumans yet. He's more familiar with Wonder Woman, Superman, Spider Man, Iron Man, the Hulk, Batman, that sort of thing. Anyway, so Ryan walks up to the table and says, "What up, ladies?" Chris and Jay are used to Ryan's sense of humor, so they don't even acknowledge his joke. They ignore it, and Chris explains that they're trying to find a name for Jay still. Ryan has several filthy suggestions, none of which are particularly appreciated by Jay. So Jay tells Ryan to watch his mouth or he'll hit him with lightning. Ryan laughs and says he's got too much super speed for Jay to even lay a finger on him. So Jay says he'll teleport Ryan's skull out of his head and keep it as a trophy then. Ryan says if Jay tries, he'll accelerate all the particles in Jay's body and make him spontaneously combust faster than the speed of thought. Chris breaks it up and says, "Girls, girls, you're both pretty," then changes the topic to something less fighty by asking how the costumes he designed are coming along. Jay's older brother actually made the mundane fabric parts, and Ryan added utility belts as well as some other minor gadgets. So Ryan says he's waiting on his costume to dry. Chris asks why it's wet, and Ryan explains that he invented a new chemical that will help his costume deal with all of the friction involved with super speed. Thus far, every time Ryan has gone running, his clothing did not survive the experience. Likewise, when Jay shoots lightning out of his hands, he's burnt through every pair of gloves he's owned. So the gloves Ryan came up with should hold together without getting shredded by Jay's lightning bolts. Anyway, so Ryan says his costume should be dry by tonight, and Chris suggests they take the new suits out for a test run. Which brings us to the main plot of this game session. That night, the boys put on their superhero costumes for the first time. Chris wears a red and blue costume, clearly drawing inspiration from his role model, Superman. Ryan wears a sleek yellow and purple costume with forearm gauntlets that each act like a small toolbox since he's the team gadgeteer. And Jay wears a green and orange costume, which he hates, so he tries to hide it under a trench coat. As they cruise around Mansfield in Jay's beat up old primer gray 1968 Ford Galaxy, Jay whines about his costume the entire time. He asks why he has to wear green and orange, and Chris says green and orange look good together. Jay asks Chris to name one person that wears green and orange. So Chris mentions Brawn, Hoist, and Roadbuster. Ryan groans and says, again with the Transformers. To which Jay, more agitated now, says, "Dude, I am not wearing green and orange. I want an all black costume." Ryan laughs and says maybe Jay's code name should be Edgelord or Grimdark. Chris says, "Dude, the primary colors are red, blue, and yellow, and the secondary colors are green, orange, and purple. So if I wear red and blue and Ryan wears yellow and purple, that leaves you with green and orange. Jay rolls his eyes and says, "Exactly. I get the leftover crap that nobody wants." Ryan tells Jay not to be such a baby. Jay says, "Fine, give me green and purple. Ryan has fire stuff. Make him wear yellow and orange." Ryan says, "No way. I hate orange." Jay says, "Well, so do I." Chris says, "You could have said something back when I was designing the costumes." Ryan jumps in on that and says, "Yeah, and before I treated the fabric to deal with stuff like lightning and teleportation." Jay says, "Okay, fine, Jesus." Chris says he's getting what he wanted, so excuse me. Chris sees that he is getting what he wanted, so he lets it drop. Ryan, who's in the back seat, slaps Jay on the arm and tells him to pull off into this parking lot. So the old gray Ford pulls into the local bowling alley. Jay does it. Chris asks why they're going to a bowling alley in superhero costumes. Ryan says, "We aren't. We're going to stash the car here and go out on foot." So they do. And they walk through a straight line of pine trees into the parking lot that is next to the parking lot that they were just in. And they walk to Swallens. It's a local store that, among other things, sells electronics equipment. Ryan leads the boys through the parking lot to the loading dock behind the store. He grabs a padlock on a bay door and then uses his super speed to vibrate the lock, and eventually it comes undone, and Ryan tosses the open lock aside, opening this huge door. As Ryan enters, Shadowstorm follows close behind, trying to blend into shadows as well as you can while wearing orange. Powerhouse speaks up, asking what Ryan is doing. And Ryan, aka Torch, explains that in order to fight crime, they're going to need a headquarters with computer equipment. Chris sort of blinks a few times and says, "Wait, hold on. Are you actually suggesting that we rob this place?" Ryan says, "Don't be so prissy about it." But Powerhouse grabs Ryan by the arm using just a little bit of his super strength. It's subtle, but the body language is clear, and Ryan does not like it. Jay just studies this in silence. Chris says, "Dude, stealing is for villains, not heroes." Jay quietly corrects Chris, saying, "Anti heroes." Chris flashes Jay a quick look, then looks right back to Ryan, who squirms free of that grip on his arm. Ryan says, "The ends justifies the means. If we don't have a computer system, we won't even know where there are crimes taking place." Chris says, "Well, I don't have a computer, and I see one in progress right now." Ryan goes on to suggest that Swallens undoubtedly has insurance, and that all insurance companies are supposedly corrupt, and that they are part of a bigger system that he refers to as the man. And he says he doesn't feel bad for screwing over the man at all. Chris says, "Wait, insurance companies don't pay stores for like shoplifting and stuff." Ryan says, "No, but they pay to replace things lost in a fire." And with that, Ryan makes his hands ignite into flame. Jay raises his eyebrows at this, but says nothing. And Chris says, "Holy crap, dude, you want to burn this place down?" So now we're talking about grand theft and arson? What's wrong with you? Ryan says, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? I thought you wanted us to be a team." Chris says, "Yeah, but not a super villain team. I want us to be a superhero team." Jay again says anti hero because he has zero interest in being a goody goody two shoes. Chris and Ryan both tell Jay to shut up, then go back to their argument, with Ryan promising they'll fight more crime than they commit. Chris says he's not cool with any of this at all. Just then, a robot walks in through the front of the store. It looks at the three boys, and in a cold mechanical growl, it says, "There you are." Suffice it to say, this ends the argument they were having, and Jay says, "Ultron?" To which the robot responds, "No, not Ultron." So Chris asks who it is, and the villain just says, "I am death." Ryan quips that this robot should get a scythe and maybe like a black hoodie if that's what he's going for. He adds that Chris here would be happy to design a costume for him. The robot just shoots an energy blast at Chris, who fails to dodge. He gets blasted out the back of the store through a wall. And as we've mentioned previously on the podcast, Chris is a changeling, and changelings have a weakness to banality, which this energy blast counts as. So not only does it do physical damage to Chris's body, but it also does damage to his mind attribute and spirit attribute as well. And it causes Chris to literally forget himself a little bit, as well as some of the various fairy arts that Lily has been teaching him. Nonetheless, he remembers how to fly and he still has super strength. So he flies back to where Necron is, says tag, and then punches the villain through the front of the store and out into the front parking lot. Chris follows it up by saying, "You're it," feeling like that was a pretty good hit. But Necron stands up as bits of broken glass fall off of his undamaged chrome body. Necron growls, "Fine," then flies at Powerhouse, tackling him and knocking him into the shelves containing the electronics equipment. Ryan shoots fire at Necron, which does no damage to the villain, but the store is on fire now. Jay teleports behind Necron, shooting him in the back with a lightning bolt. As Necron sees who's behind him, Powerhouse then punches the villain in his metal face. But so far, none of the boys' attacks have even begun to penetrate the robot's damage resistance. So Necron isn't hurt, he's just annoyed. He jumps into the air, ready to bring a fist down on Powerhouse when Jay shoots him with lightning again. But since he's not touching the ground yet, he's electrified for the moment. So when he hits Powerhouse, not only does Powerhouse take damage from the punch, he's electrocuted as well. The punch throws a big flash of light, illuminating the dark store for a moment. While the others are distracted, Ryan starts to use super speed to rob the store blind. He makes multiple trips, moving all the computer equipment out into a semi trailer. And once he has all the computer stuff, he goes after the stereo equipment too. Not that the boys are going to use that for crime fighting, but because Ryan just can't stand to see nice stuff burn up in a fire. Meanwhile, Chris is boxing with the robot that seems to be invulnerable, and its knuckles are made out of cold iron, which changelings are also vulnerable to. So Chris is accomplishing nothing, and if this keeps up, he's going to die. Jay shoots the robot with lightning bolt after lightning bolt for all the good that does. Chris says he thinks the villain is insulated, but Jay thinks he's slowly doing some damage. Going by appearances alone, it's actually really hard to know for sure. Chris asks Jay to not use lightning when he's engaged in close quarters combat, and Jay just tells Chris to man up. As the fire at Swallens grows larger, people at the bowling alley next door notice and call 911. Crowd forms and they see Powerhouse get punched through the front of the store again and out into the large parking lot. He tumbles to a stop near Park Avenue and gets up bloody and struggling to even draw breath. Necron's metal feet crush broken glass from the store's shattered windows as he walks towards where Chris is at. Necron tells Chris that he's always been a thorn in his side and he's going to take him out now before he can grow up and be a bigger problem later. Chris can barely get to his feet, and he does, but comments that he's surprised that the mysterious villain is from the future, apparently. Chris is sort of flattered in a weird way that whatever's going on in the future is worth pulling a Terminator here back in 1991. Chris says, "I don't even know your name." And just as Necron prepares to tell him, he suddenly gets hit by a water cooler traveling at Mach 1. Ryan had carried it up to top speed and then stopped just short of the villain, letting momentum carry the water cooler into Necron's face. That actually did some damage. And then Jay shoots Necron with lightning again while he's wet. Powerhouse shoots an energy blast of his own as his regeneration kicks in, giving Powerhouse back 1 hit point every turn. Necron fires energy blasts at the boys, and anytime one of them dodges a shot, that beam has to go somewhere. So it always strikes something in the background, doing damage there. And by now, a crowd has started to form outside of the bowling alley next door, and there are innocent bystanders watching this. Powerhouse says, "We've got to get the fight away from these people. We don't want a stray shot hitting anybody." Ryan tells Jay to teleport the robot elsewhere, but Jay says he only knows how to teleport himself so far. So Powerhouse flies into Necron, punching him as hard as he can away from the crowd. While the robot has damage resistance that keeps it from taking a limited amount of physical damage, it can still be moved because Powerhouse's strength far exceeds the robot's weight. So they knock it into the yard of the next property over, accidentally knocking over a tree in the process. Jay teleports to where Necron is, punching it some more. Ryan zips over at super speed, shooting the villain with more fire. And Powerhouse, who's the slowest of the Continuum members, flies over, hitting Necron with yet another punch. This goes on for a while, but the robot is too tough for the fledgling heroes. Necron monologues, saying he's used to fighting them as adults. So if they think they're a match for him as kids, they're sadly mistaken. The boys take cover behind that downed tree, and Necron hits the tree with an energy blast. As wood chips fly every which way, Powerhouse has an idea. "Guys, let's cross the streams." Ryan says, "What?" Jay shakes his head. But Powerhouse says, "No, really. We all aim for the chest. We all shoot the exact same spot at the exact same time. We combine our attacks into one big hit, and maybe that can penetrate this guy's armor." Ryan says it's a dumb idea. So Chris says if Ryan has a better plan, he's all ears. Ryan does not. So he rolls his eyes and says, "Fine." So the boys pop up from behind the log and they all fire their respective ranged attacks at the exact same time, all of them striking the exact same spot, and it works. Necron is stunned for a second, and Powerhouse sees his chance. With the metal of the robot's neck damaged, Powerhouse flies over, plants his feet on Necron's shoulders, grabs his head, and starts to pull up as hard as he can. Necron makes a weird metallic screaming sound as Powerhouse rips off the robot's head. Powerhouse falls backwards onto the ground as the spirit of the entity known as Necron shoots up into the sky, off to find a new physical body to possess. The boys lay there for a moment, catching their breath, and they can hear sirens. So Jay says, "That's our cue to leave," which brings us to the epilogue. Ryan hides a stolen semi trailer in the forest behind Powerhouse's farm, which Powerhouse hates. He asks why it's got to be here, and Ryan explains that Jay lives in town where there's no space to hide something this big. And Ryan's house has a little more space than that, but not much. But Chris's farm has more room than anybody else does. Chris shakes his hand and says, "Someone's going to find this, and I'm going to get arrested for being an accomplice." Ryan assures Chris that none of them are going to get arrested. Pretty soon, they're going to have a pretty cool underground headquarters. That way, if it's underground, it can't be seen by planes and stuff. Chris crosses his arms, still unhappy. So Ryan says, "I promise, no more crime from here on out. Just this once, and we'll make up for it. I promise." Chris says, "There had better not be any more crime. I mean it." Ryan smiles and says, "There won't, but there is a catch." Chris has kind of a blank expression and he says, "What now?" Ryan reminds him that Jay can't teleport anything other than himself, which means he can't teleport the dirt out of the ground to make the headquarters. Chris says, "And?" So Ryan hands him a shovel. And that was it for this one. Jay Mora actually ran this adventure back in 1991. And the fact that the boys started their careers like this has always bothered me. So in 1996, after I took over as the fifth game master, I ran a game where Chris went back in time from 1996 to 1926 and he got stranded there, kind of like in an old movie called The Final Countdown. Anyways, over the years, he bought Swallens. So it was actually his store that his younger self was there for that night and that burnt down. And it was the older version of Chris that ignored it When the boys showed up on security tapes, it was the older Chris who refused to press charges, etc. It's not perfect, but I like it better when I know who owned the store. And this was the very first game that Jay ran in GURP Supers. Prior to this, we had been playing it in DC Heroes. For the younger versions of the characters that were more street level, we wanted to go with GURPS. So the fact that this is the first of the GURPS games means I am super nostalgic for this one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. If so, as always, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, and leave a comment. And from all of us to all of you, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you next time.